The Black Hawk was already at 9,000 feet when they cut his harness. No warning, no hesitation. Just the cold gleam of a knife sliding through the straps that pinned Chief Petty Officer Ethan Walker to the floor. 3 seconds later, 2 men shoved him into the frozen Montana night. No parachute, no rope, no chance. At least that's what the Delta operators watching thought. They had no idea a retired veteran lived beneath those ridgelines, or that his old German Shepherd would be the first to find Ethan's broken body buried in the snow. That discovery would unravel a hidden network of betrayal inside the U.S. military and ignite a fight for the truth that no one intended to survive. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and miracles in the coldest places on Earth. The winter night over Montana was so cold it seemed to hollow out the air itself. High above the frozen ridges, the UH-60 Black Hawk hummed through the darkness, its rotor blades carving the sky in steady, disciplined arcs. Inside the cabin, Chief Petty Officer Ethan Walker sat strapped to the floor, his gloved fingers resting lightly on his harness buckle. Ethan, 36 years old, carried the look of a man who had lived too long in the shadow between life and death. His face was angular, clean-shaven only because Navy rules demanded it, and the faint lines etched along his eyes spoke of deployments that no one back home ever truly understood. He had a quiet demeanor, a habit of observing rather than speaking, shaped by years of missions where silence had meant survival. Tonight, something gnawed at him, a cold instinct deeper than the Montana winter. The flight was supposed to be a routine night exercise, yet the atmosphere inside the cabin felt wrong. The other unit on board, a 4-man Delta Force element, sat unusually stiff. Their leader, Master Sergeant Ryan Locke, had the rigid confidence of a man used to giving orders others feared to refuse. Locke was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a square jaw shadowed by stubble and eyes that had lost any softness long ago. He carried himself with the arrogance of someone who believed the rules bent for him. Rumors had long followed him, black market contacts, questionable decisions overseas, but nothing ever stuck. Power protected men like him. Ethan watched him without moving his head, cataloging every odd detail. The hushed radio messages Locke exchanged but never explained, the subtle nods among the Delta operators, the unspoken tension that thickened the air with every mile. When the Black Hawk crossed above Madison Range, the temperature plunged sharply. Frost crept across the cabin window. Ethan exhaled, watching the cloud of his breath drift like ghost smoke. Then he saw Locke stand. Something in the man's posture, too deliberate, too calm, triggered a warning deep in Ethan's gut. Locke walked toward him with a measured stride. One of the Delta operators shifted slightly, blocking the pilot's view of the cabin. Ethan's pulse tightened. "Walker," Locke said, his voice flat, unreadable. Ethan opened his mouth to ask what was happening, but he didn't get the chance. A sudden flash of steel, a combat knife, its blade catching the dim cabin lights, cut swiftly through the harness straps across Ethan's chest. The world seemed to slow, molasses thick, as the last strap separated with a snap. Ethan barely had 3 seconds to react. He saw Locke's hand thrust forward, felt 2 sets of arms shove hard against his shoulders. Then he was weightless. The Montana night swallowed him whole as he was hurled out the open side door. The roar of the rotors vanished, replaced by an absolute crushing silence. Ethan plummeted through the sky, the cold slicing into him like thousands of needles. At first there was no fear, only disbelief. Betrayal had a strange way of numbing emotion. But as the thin air ripped past him, his mind snapped into military precision. Control your fall, reduce the spin, spread your arms, shift your weight. Training took over, the kind drilled into him during Halo operations years ago. Still, nothing could erase the brutal truth: he had no parachute. Below him, the dark expanse of pine forest rushed closer. The treetops rose like jagged spears. Ethan clenched his jaw. Not like this, not for nothing. The impact came, branches cracking, bark exploding, snow bursting upward in a white halo. Pain detonated through his ribs, his shoulder, his back. His body tumbled, struck the ground, and slid down a snowy incline until he finally collapsed against a fallen log. For several long seconds, Ethan couldn't breathe. The world flickered in and out, shadows blurring with moonlit snow. A metallic taste filled his mouth. He forced air into his lungs. A small victory clawed from the jaws of death. His thoughts spun, fogged, struggling to hold shape. Luck? Why? What did they know? Who gave the order? Blood seeped into the snow beneath him, blooming like a red flower in the white silence. His vision narrowed. He wasn't afraid of dying. He had faced death before. What terrified him was dying without understanding the betrayal, without clearing his name, without fighting back. Darkness began to gather at the edges of his sight, soft and heavy. He felt himself slipping. Then he heard something, light, crunching on the snow, slow, curious. A quiet, steady sound. Ethan tried to lift his head, but it felt like stone. In the blur of his weakening vision, two amber-colored eyes appeared out of the tree line. A large German shepherd stepped forward, fur dusted with frost, breath puffing in soft white clouds. The dog was around 6 years old, strong and broad-chested, with dark gray and black markings that blended naturally into the winter forest. There was intelligence in its gaze, sharp, alert and cautious, the kind of instinct carved by both training and survival. The dog sniffed the air, then slowly approached Ethan. Its ears twitched, its posture shifting from defensive to concerned as it caught the scent of blood. The shepherd let out a short, urgent bark. Ethan's mind drifted, barely conscious. Am I hallucinating? But the dog stepped closer, nudging Ethan's sleeve with its nose. Another bark, louder this time, pointed, almost calling out to someone in the distance. The dog bit gently into the edge of Ethan's coat and pulled, testing his weight. Ethan felt himself move an inch across the snow. The shepherd braced its paws and pulled again, this time with more determination. Snowflakes fell around them like silent witnesses as the dog continued tugging, step by steady step, refusing to leave the dying man alone in the frost-bound night. Ethan whispered a hoarse breath that barely formed a word. "Good boy." The dog barked once more, the sound slicing into the quiet forest. Somewhere far off, a voice answered faintly, its tone startled, alarmed, human. Ethan's eyes closed. He didn't know who the voice belonged to. He didn't know where the dog had come from. But he knew one thing as the darkness took him. He was not alone. And someone, somewhere, was coming because this dog had called for help. Hunter tugged harder, loyal but desperate, pulling Ethan 1 inch closer to survival. The snow around Pine Ridge Village glowed faintly under the pale morning light. 3 miles from the ridge where Ethan Walker had fallen, the wind moved slowly between the trees like a tired ghost, carrying with it the scent of pine and frozen earth. In a small cabin at the village's edge, Frank Dawson tightened the strap on his weathered boots. Frank, at 50 years old, carried a body shaped by war and years of solitude. His frame was solid though slightly stooped, his shoulders broad but heavy with memory. A gray beard covered his square jaw, trimmed roughly by the kind of man who never cared much about appearances. His hair, once dark, now carried streaks of silver like scars left by time. His eyes, deep-set and steel blue, held a hollowed stillness as if they had witnessed too much violence to ever fully rest. Frank had served in Iraq during the early years of the war. One brutal ambush, one moment of fire and chaos had taken the lives of the men he led and left him with wounds deeper than any bullet could carve. Since returning home, he had lived quietly, alone, choosing the company of his German shepherd Hunter over people. Hunter was 6 years old, a strong and muscular dog with a black and gray coat that shimmered under the winter sun. His ears were sharp and alert, and he moved with the keen instincts of a creature born to guard. Hunter trusted few humans, but he trusted Frank completely. And Frank, in a life stripped down to silence and routines, trusted Hunter more than he trusted the world. That morning, Hunter stiffened suddenly, lifting his head from where he lay near the cabin's hearth. His ears twitched, his body tensed. Then came the sound Frank had learned to recognize, the sharp, insistent bark that meant something was wrong. "Easy, boy," Frank muttered, but the dog was already moving. Hunter raced to the door, barking twice, deep and urgent. Frank grabbed the flashlight that hung by a leather strap near the kitchen table. Then, almost by habit, he took the old pump-action shotgun that leaned beside the door, not because he expected danger, but because the Montana wilderness respected no one who walked into it unarmed. When Frank stepped outside, Hunter was already bounding across the snow-covered yard, nose to the wind. Frank followed, boots crunching through the cold crust of snow, breath cutting through the morning air in pale clouds. Hunter led him into the forest, weaving between trees, stopping only to sniff the ground before running again. Frank felt unease building in his chest. He knew this dog. Hunter didn't panic. He didn't bark, unless there was reason. After nearly 10 minutes of tracking, Frank stopped abruptly. Hunter stood beside a fallen spruce tree, tail stiff, body tense. On the ground lay a man in a shredded military uniform, his body half buried in snow, his skin pale with frost. Frank's breath caught. The man's clothes bore the patches and insignia of a Navy SEAL. Blood darkened the snow beneath him. His face, sharp jawline, dark hair matted with ice, lips turning blue, was twisted in pain. Frank had seen men like this before, men hovering between life and death, clinging to consciousness with the last thread of their will. He knelt beside the stranger and pressed 2 fingers to the side of the man's neck. A weak pulse, fragile, but alive. "Hunter," Frank murmured, unable to hide the astonishment in his voice. "You've found him." The dog nudged Ethan's arm with his nose, whining softly. Frank wasted no time. With surprising strength, he lifted the injured soldier into his arms. Ethan's limp weight reminded him of the men he once carried from burning vehicles in Iraq, and the memory hit him like a blow to the chest. He pushed it down. There was no room for ghosts right now. The walk back to the cabin felt longer with each step. By the time Frank laid Ethan on the cot inside, the soldier's breathing had grown ragged, shallow. Frank pulled off Ethan's frozen boots and cut away part of his sleeve to check for fractures. Underneath the frost-bitten skin, he saw bruises spreading like cruel fingerprints across Ethan's ribs and shoulder. Hunter paced anxiously near the bed, ears low. "We're not losing him," Frank said quietly. He heated water, wrapped Ethan in wool blankets, and began cleaning the wounds with steady, practiced hands. As he worked, he noticed the man's dog tags. Walker, Ethan C., a Navy SEAL. That explained the toughness. Men like that didn't die easily. Hours passed. The snow outside thickened into a silent storm. Hunter dozed near the bed but woke at every change in Ethan's breathing. Near midnight, Ethan stirred. His eyes opened slowly, heavy but focused, revealing a pair of storm-gray irises filled with confusion and pain. "Where am I?" Ethan rasped. Frank leaned over, voice calm but firm. "Safe enough. Hunter found you. Lucky for you, he's got better instincts than most men I served with." Ethan studied Frank's face, the rugged lines, the age carved into his features. He saw the truth there. Loss, strength, and the kind of honesty a man couldn't fake. I fell," Ethan managed, his voice strained. "No," Frank said, gaze narrowing. "Someone threw you," Ethan's jaw tightened. The memory of Locke's cold eyes returned like a knife twisting inside his chest. Pain, physical and emotional, rose with it. "My own team," Ethan whispered. "Delta Force. They cut my harness. I was supposed to die." Frank's expression darkened. He sat back on the wooden stool beside the cot, bracing his elbows on his knees. He had seen this before, soldiers betrayed by those who were supposed to protect them. "Name?" he asked quietly. "Ryan Locke," Ethan said. Frank nodded slowly. "Men like him, they rot a unit from the inside." His voice held the bitterness of someone who had served under such men, someone who had watched good soldiers die because of arrogance and corruption. Ethan swallowed, mind spinning with fear, anger, and exhaustion. "They'll come looking," he said. "They need my body." "Then we make sure they don't find it," Frank replied. Before Ethan could answer, Hunter suddenly rose, body rigid, ears pointing toward the door. A low growl rumbled from his throat, deep, dangerous, unmistakably alert. Frank stood, shotgun already in hand. He exchanged a glance with Ethan, whose eyes widened despite the pain. Someone was out there. Someone close. And they were not friendly. "They're here," Frank said quietly. The blizzard had swallowed the forest long before midnight, turning the world into a white maze where distance vanished into drifting snow. Frank Dawson stood at the doorway of the cabin he had lived in for nearly a decade, gripping the old shotgun with one hand while forcing a wool cap over his gray-streaked hair with the other. His breath came out in short, controlled bursts. He had learned long ago that panic never saved anyone. Tonight, panic would kill them. Ethan Walker leaned heavily against the wall, trying to steady himself. Ethan's tall frame, athletic but worn down by war and wounds, trembled under layers of borrowed clothing. His dark hair clung damply to his forehead, and despite the swelling in his ribs and the deep bruise across his cheek, his gray eyes stayed sharp, alert, calculating, refusing to surrender. A lifetime of Navy SEAL conditioning ran through him like steel wiring, even when his body was failing. Hunter stood between them, tail stiff, ears angled forward. The 6-year-old German Shepherd looked like a creature carved for winter survival. Dense fur blackened along his back, lighter gray along his sides, powerful legs braced against the wind, sweeping under the cabin's roofline. But more than his strength, it was the intensity in the dog's amber eyes that commanded attention. It was the look of an animal who understood danger the way soldiers did. "We move now," Frank said, his voice low and steady. Frank, at 50, had the posture of a man who once carried heavy packs through deserts and cities littered with ruin. His beard, rough and gray, outlined a jaw hardened by old battles and older guilt. He glanced at Ethan, seeing more than just a wounded soldier. He saw the same haunted expression he once wore after Iraq. "They can't be more than a few hundred yards out." Ethan nodded, struggling to breathe through the stabbing pain in his ribs. "I can keep up," he insisted, even though he wasn't sure he could. In his mind, images of Ryan Locke's cold stare flickered like flashes of lightning. The betrayal, the shove out the helicopter door, the slicing wind, he felt them all again. Trust had been a fragile thing even before tonight. Now it was a corpse buried under snow. Frank threw a heavy coat around Ethan's shoulders and handed him a walking stick. "If you slow down, say something," Frank muttered. "I'm old, not blind." Ethan almost smiled, but the pain stole it away. Hunter barked once, short, commanding, and began moving. The dog's instincts kicked into full alert, guiding him through the blinding storm. They stepped into a world where visibility shrank to barely 2 meters. Snowflakes whipped sideways like shards of glass. The trees loomed as dark silhouettes, branches sagging under the weight of frozen white. Ethan trudged close behind Hunter, each step a battle. His breath came out in ragged clouds, chest burning. Every time he faltered, Hunter paused, turning back, nudging Ethan's hand with his cold, wet nose. Each touch felt like a lifeline pulling him forward, and each time the dog did it, Ethan felt something stir inside him, a stubborn refusal to let death have him. Frank walked behind them, watching their tracks vanish quickly under the falling snow. He kept scanning the sky, his mind calculating dangers he couldn't see. He had lived long enough to know that survival sometimes depended more on listening to instinct than anything else. And tonight, instinct screamed that Locke's men were close. They moved deeper into the forest, then angled left toward a frozen stream. Frank tapped Ethan's shoulder. "We follow the creek," he said. "A frozen surface hides heat signatures. If they've got a chopper with fly-R, they'll lose us." Ethan forced a grunt of agreement. He knew the tactic well. Cold water, cold surfaces, anything to confuse thermal detection. The frozen stream groaned under their weight but held. As they moved, Ethan's mind spiraled inward. How did they know? Why Locke? Who gave the order? Betrayal in the field wasn't new to him. He had seen local allies turn, seen deals collapse into ambushes. But betrayal from within the U.S. military, from a unit meant to fight beside him, was a wound deeper than the bruises across his ribs. Every step pressed the questions deeper into his thoughts until his head throbbed. He had always believed in loyalty, in honor, in brotherhood forged by fire. Tonight, those beliefs felt like broken promises he was forced to carry. Meanwhile, the forest around them creaked and groaned, ice shifting on branches, wind howling like distant voices of the lost. Hunter stopped suddenly. His body stiffened, nose to the air. Frank lifted the shotgun, eyes scanning the darkness. Ethan gritted his teeth, steadying himself. But Hunter wasn't sensing enemies. Not yet. The dog leapt ahead and began leading them up a ridge path toward the saber-tooth rocks, jagged formations known to locals, but navigable, if one had a guide who didn't rely on sight. Hunter's paws moved with uncanny certainty, even when the storm thickened. Behind them, several miles back, another presence stalked their trail. Cole Ramirez, the tracker, moved like a shadow among the trees. Cole was in his late 30s, lean and wiry, with a face shaped by mountains and survival, sharp cheekbones dusted with snow, and a tattoo of a raven along his neck. His dark eyes were cold and predatory, eyes that missed nothing. Raised by trappers in northern Wyoming, he had learned to read snow the way others read books. Every broken twig, every drop of blood, every disturbance in the frost spoke to him. And Ethan's blood, faint but present, had led Cole across miles of wilderness. Cole crouched near a small drop of crimson on the snow. He touched it with a gloved finger, raising it to the light. "Got you," he whispered, voice icy with confidence. Behind him, 2 Delta operators waited, their rifles ready. Cole gestured forward. "They're moving fast, but not fast enough." Ethan, unaware of the tracker closing in, stumbled as pain surged again. He fell to one knee. Hunter rushed back, nudging fiercely, barking once in alarm. Frank hurried to help him up. Ethan forced himself back to his feet, jaw clenched tight. "I'm fine," he lied. Frank knew he wasn't, but he also knew Ethan wouldn't stop. Hours seemed to blur. Finally, the forest thinned, revealing the faint outline of the saber-tooth ridge ahead. Beyond it, down the valley, lay Pine Ridge, a place of refuge, and the sheriff Frank trusted. "We're close," Frank said, breath heavy. Another hour, but just as hope flickered, Hunter's bark shattered it, a sharp, urgent sound. The dog spun toward the ridge behind them, fur raised. Ethan turned. Through the curtain of snow, a piercing beam swept across the trees, a harsh, hissing light, cutting the darkness. Infrared. A helicopter. Locke had found them, much faster than they expected. Snow clouds hung low over Pine Ridge as dawn barely pushed through, casting a pale silver glow across the small Montana town, buried beneath winter's weight. The wind whistled between shuttered storefronts carrying the scent of pine and diesel, mixing into a quiet that felt like the world was holding its breath. For Ethan Walker, that stillness was a thin veneer stretched over danger. Frank Dawson guided Ethan and Hunter through the back alley behind the sheriff's office, keeping his shotgun angled low but ready. Frank's breath fogged in front of his scruffy beard, and his sharp blue eyes scanned every shadow. His years in Iraq had carved those eyes into instruments of survival. They never stopped moving, never stopped searching for the next threat. Even now, older and limping slightly from an old shrapnel wound, Frank possessed a controlled intensity that no amount of quiet rural life could soften. Ethan, hunched under layers of borrowed clothing, winced with every step. His ribs burned, his shoulder throbbed, and his entire body felt like glass glued together by sheer will. But his mind was clearer than it had been since the fall. Betrayal cut deeper than his injuries, and every time he replayed the moment Locke pushed him into the void, something inside him twisted tight, like a wire pulled to its breaking point. Sheriff Rob Turner met them behind the town's grain warehouse, a tall, broad man in his late 40s with thick, frost-blonde hair and a trimmed beard hiding a scar that cut from jaw to cheekbone. His eyes were steady, the kind of calm born from balancing law, morality, and the ghosts left behind by 2 tours in Afghanistan. Turner had the presence of a man people trusted instinctively, not because he demanded it, but because he lived by a code that didn't bend. "Get inside," Turner murmured, guiding them into the old storage building. Hunter trotted in first, tail stiff, nose twitching as he inspected every corner. The warehouse smelled of cold wood, dust, and old grain. Light filtered through cracks in the walls in thin silver beams. Turner locked the door behind them. "Frank said you were Navy, that you were pushed out of a bird at 9,000 feet. That true?" Ethan nodded, breath slow, steady. "Master Sergeant Ryan Locke, Delta. He cut my harness. No shoot, no warning." Turner swore under his breath. "What the hell did you do to earn that kind of betrayal?" Ethan lowered himself onto an overturned crate, clutching his ribs. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to." Frank joined him, placing a battered metal case at Ethan's feet. "This is what he needs." Turner raised a brow. "One of your toys?" Frank smirked, though worry creased his face. "Old decoder from my unit days. Pulls encrypted fragments out of corrupted files. Should open anything the government didn't intend us to keep." Ethan powered on the small device. It hummed softly, green light blinking. He inserted the mission drive he had recovered before the fall. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a series of scrambled audio files popped up on the tiny screen. Static, then voices. A man with a cold, commanding tone spoke first. "Locke, terminate Walker. Immediate. He's compromised the operation." A second voice, Locke's, replied with chilling calm. "Understood." More static, then the first man again. "Authorization. General Malcolm Reeves." Turner stiffened. "Reeves? As in the Malcolm Reeves? Pentagon Golden Boy, 2 stars decorated strategist?" "He's not just a strategist," Ethan muttered. "He's running something off the books. Weapons being funneled into private hands. Laundered contracts. I found the wrong crate in the wrong hangar. Reeves decided I was a leak." Turner rubbed his temples. "Damn it, Ethan. This isn't small. This is the kind of thing men disappear for." Hunter's sudden growl cut through the tension. The German shepherd stood rigid at the door, teeth partly bared, hackles rising like a living alarm. The deep rumble in Hunter's chest vibrated through the wooden floor. Frank grabbed his shotgun. Something spooked him. Turner peered through a crack in the wall. Black SUV, no plates. Before they could react, gunfire cracked outside, short, controlled bursts. Turner drew his sidearm, eyes hardening. "Locke's here!" The next seconds unfolded with brutal speed. Bullets splintered wooden planks, punching holes in the walls. Frank shoved Ethan to the ground just as a window shattered. Turner returned fire with precision, moving like the soldier he used to be. Hunter barked fiercely, darting back and forth, refusing to leave Ethan's side. Then a new threat revealed itself, a faint glint from the ridge across the street. A sniper's perch. Cole Ramirez. Cole was a hunter built for winter war, lean, angular, face weathered by wind and long nights. His dark eyes were razor-focused, unblinking behind the scope of a long-range rifle. Snow coated his jacket like camouflage. He exhaled once and pulled the trigger. Hunter saw the flash before the sound reached them. With an instinct born of loyalty and sharp animal intuition, the dog lunged, slamming into Ethan's chest. They both hit the floor as the bullet screamed overhead and punched into a support beam where Ethan's head had been a heartbeat earlier. Ethan froze, stunned, staring at the splintered beam. He touched Hunter's fur, fingers shaking. "Good boy. You saved me again." Hunter nudged Ethan's face, whining softly but keeping his body half shielding him. Frank fired out the window, scattering Cole's position. Turner reloaded quickly, shouting, "We need to fall back, now!" Ethan stumbled to his feet. Hunter pressed close against his leg. They pushed through the rear exit, slipping behind the warehouse into a narrow alley choked with drifting snow. They had barely taken 3 steps when a voice boomed through the air, swirling white, loud, furious, inevitable. "Walker, I'm going to finish you myself." Ryan Locke stepped from the snow haze, his rifle raised, his face twisted with the cold certainty of a man who believed himself untouchable. Morning crept over Pine Ridge beneath a sky streaked with pale winter blue, the air so sharp it felt like it could cut skin. Snow glimmered in untouched layers along the forest's edge, but the stillness was deceptive. Beneath it pulsed the tension of a hunt nearing its end. Ethan Walker staggered through the trees with Hunter at his side, the German shepherd's breath puffing in steady clouds. Despite the bandage around one back leg, a wound from earlier gunfire, the 6-year-old dog moved with fierce determination, ears perked, muscles taut like coiled rope. His amber eyes flicked constantly between the path ahead and Ethan behind him, as if balancing instinct and loyalty. Frank Dawson and Sheriff Rob Turner followed close. Frank, his graying beard flecked with frost, jaw clenched beneath deep lines etched by old wars, carried his shotgun low but ready. Turner, broader, pettier, and taller, with cold blonde hair and a scar that caught the morning light, scanned the slope ahead with the seasoned vigilance of a soldier turned lawman. Both men breathed hard, but neither slowed. They understood that today was the day they ended what Reeves and Locke had started. Ethan's ribs burned with every breath, but the deeper ache sat in his chest, an emotional wound, raw and unresolved. Betrayal by a brother in arms did not just cut flesh. It carved something out of the soul. Locke's voice, the shove from the Black Hawk, the memory of falling through darkness, it haunted him like a half-remembered nightmare, a wound that refused to fade. Today, he would face the man responsible, and today he would not fall. Hunter suddenly lifted his head high, sniffing the wind. The dog broke into a trot, guiding them up a narrow path toward a rocky incline. Frank recognized it instantly, the old shooting ridge he trained at as a young man. Years before war had turned his hair gray and his laughter rare. The terrain was steep, uneven, edged by jagged stone, and crowded by fir trees that funneled movement into predictable lines. "Perfect for trapping someone," Frank muttered. Turner nodded. "Or getting trapped if we mess this up." But Frank's mind was already working, calculating angles, recalling the way sound echoed between these rocks, the blind spots he used to exploit in drills. "We can force Locke into the narrow cleft," he said, pointing toward a wedge of stone barely wide enough for one man. "He'll lose mobility, and he'll hate that." Ethan breathed out, slow and controlled. "Then that's where we finish it." Snow crunched nearby, soft, but too heavy to be wildlife. "Positions," Turner whispered. They scattered just as Locke's team emerged from the tree line like shadows pulled from the storm. Ryan Locke stepped forward first, tall and cold-eyed, his face carved from stone and cruelty. In the rising dawn, the lines on his face looked deeper, remnants of a life lived in violence without remorse. The man behind him, Cole Ramirez, followed silently, crouched with a hunter's grace, the scar along his jaw stark against wind-chapped skin. His dark eyes were sharp, predatory, impossible to read. Cole lifted his rifle, scanning the slope with mechanical precision, and that was when Hunter moved. The German shepherd launched forward in a blur of fur and fury, teeth bared. Cole barely had time to curse before Hunter clamped onto his forearm, forcing him to drop the rifle. The weapon clattered against stone and vanished down the slope in a spray of snow. Cole staggered, losing balance as Hunter growled deep in his throat. Turner used the opening. "Move!" Frank fired once, not to kill, but to drive Locke back. The shot struck the rock beside him, forcing him toward the narrow cleft. The trap. Locke realized too late. Ethan charged forward, pain forgotten, driven by something primal. Locke swung his rifle like a club, but Ethan caught the blow on his forearm, grimacing, and crashed into him. The two men tumbled into the tight cleft, where Locke's size worked against him. Ethan, smaller but far better trained in close-quarters combat, pressed the advantage. The world narrowed to fists, boots, and breath, snow exploding under every strike. Locke grabbed Ethan's throat. "You should have stayed dead." Ethan's vision darkened, but he forced his knee upward, hitting Locke's injured side. The bigger man choked, grip loosening. Ethan smashed his elbow into Locke's jaw. Then again, and again. The betrayal, the fall, the cold, the knowledge that Locke would have buried countless others. All of it flowed into every strike he landed. Finally, Locke collapsed backward, snow staining with his blood. Turner rushed in, securing him in cuffs as Ethan fought to catch his breath. Cole Ramirez attempted to flee, but Frank fired a warning shot so close it blew snow across Cole's face. Surrounded, wounded, disarmed, Cole went still. "It's over," Frank growled. By the time they reached town, Turner had already sent every piece of evidence, including Reeves's orders, Locke's confession fragments, and the mission logs, to FBI servers and to secured Pentagon channels via an encrypted line. Frank watched the transmission confirm, exhaling a breath he felt like he'd been holding for years. General Malcolm Reeves was arrested within hours, charged with treason, conspiracy, and illegal weapons trafficking. Locke, barely clinging to consciousness, was taken into federal custody. Cole Ramirez, silent as ever, surrendered, his eyes filled with a storm no one else understood. Ethan Walker was finally cleared. For the first time since he had fallen from the sky, he felt the weight on his chest lighten, not entirely gone, but shifting enough for him to breathe again. He spent the next days at Frank's cabin, watching Hunter limp through the snow with his bandaged leg, but still refusing to rest. Frank, sitting on the porch with a cup of steaming coffee, wore a small, rare smile. A smile Ethan realized he had never seen before. It wasn't joy, it was peace, and Ethan felt it too. One afternoon, as the wind softened and snowflakes drifted like slow-moving stars, Ethan knelt beside Hunter, brushing his fingers through the dog's thick fur. "You saved me twice," Ethan whispered. "Now it's my turn to walk beside you." Hunter pressed his head into Ethan's palm. Winter was still cold, but something in their story had only just begun. In the quiet stillness of Pine Ridge, long after the snow settled and the echoes of battle faded, one truth remained. Sometimes God sends miracles in forms we least expect. Not in lightning or thunder, but in the steady footsteps of a loyal dog, in the courage of a wounded soldier refusing to give up, and in the kindness of a forgotten veteran who chose compassion over fear. Their story reminds us that even in our darkest winters, when betrayal breaks our hearts or life knocks us to our knees, God can place a light on our path, a helping hand, a second chance, a reminder that we are never truly alone. And just like Ethan, Frank, and Hunter, Each of us faces battles the world may never see. But every day, through faith, courage, and the quiet miracles around us, God guides us forward. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, bravery, and the unseen miracles that walk beside us. May God bless you, protect your home, and keep you warm through every storm you face. Amen.